Now let's look at some roles that access points and stations can play into a Wi-Fi cell. Okay, we've seen already some of those. We've seen the wireless client, that's the laptop, that's easy. We also saw the access point, that's easy too. But your access point can actually play some other roles. One of them is what we call the repeater. In that topology, you have one access point that is sending a signal and that has a certain coverage area, a basic service area. But what happens if you want to cover beyond that area? Of course, you could put another access point, but in some cases you cannot because, for example, you are in a warehouse and you are too far away from the switch to be able to position another access point that would be communicating with that switch. Remember, the maximum length of a cable is supposed to be 100 meters or 328 feet. So if you're farther than that, how do you do? Well, you can put another access point in the middle, and that access point will not be connecting to any wire. It would just repeat the signal from the access point on one direction to the client, and from the client in the other way back to the access point. That is a repeater. Of course, that repeater will have some constraints, right? It will have to be on the same channel as the access point and of course on the client. And also adding a repeater will mean that the throughput is going to be divided because, half of the time the repeater will be repeating one side or the other, and half of that time is of course lost for direct communication between the laptop and the access point. But at least you expand your channel range beyond the cell side and you can cover further along. It is not a very common scenario though, because again, it has a lot of downsides. So that's a repeater. Another one is what we call the work group bridge. This is a very different case. In that case, you have a device, maybe a PC or maybe a printer, that does not have any Wi-Fi card. But for some reason, it's in an area where the only communication possible is Wi-Fi. Maybe because again, it's in a remote location like a warehouse where there is too long a length to go to get to the switch, or maybe because it's mobile, it's on the cart in a hospital. In any case, that device needs to communicate using Wi-Fi but doesn't have any wireless card. So what you would do then is that on an access point, you would configure a specific workgroup bridge function that will make that wireless access point behave like a wireless client to the real access point that is in the middle. So it's still an access point, right? It's just a special mode, a special configuration that you have on that access point to make it act as a client. Then you connect the wired connection of that access point to a switch or directly to the device or devices that you want to connect to the wireless infrastructure. And that workgroup bridge is just a client to the AP, but a special one because it may have more than one MAC address, not because of its own, but because it's connecting maybe more than one single device. And then there is the last mode, which is what we call bridges. So it sounds like workgroup bridge because it's going to use Wi-Fi to bridge systems, but it's not a workgroup bridge in the sense that you're not connecting a wired device, you're connecting a building to another building using Wi-Fi. So typically there you have a central location which may be a headquarters, and that's going to be what we call the root bridge, the one at the center. And around it, in different buildings, you may have some access points on the rooftop that are going to communicate with that root bridge. And those, because they are going to communicate with the hub, they have a different role, which is called non-root bridge. The system is set so that non-root bridges cannot communicate with each other directly. They have to go through the root bridge. And root bridges can only communicate with non-root bridges, and root bridge cannot communicate with another root bridge. So there is this hierarchy that makes that only non-root talks to root and vice versa. This is typical of small campuses where you have maybe one central location with a root bridge on the roof and maybe 2 or 3 other buildings that are around that needs to be communicated in sort of point-to-multipoint fashion.